Okay, so the equipment that we've collected for this practical so far is a sharp knife. I've got a selection of 3 because I'm going to show them to you, but you will only need to pick the one that you want to use. And then on my board, on my plastic tray here, which I've got out of my cupboard, I've put all of the ingredients that I'm going to use. And as I weigh and measure them out and chop them up, I can put them back onto the board. The other equipment that you're going to need is your measuring jug, which comes out of your cupboard, and also a wooden spoon, which you'll use to stir your saucepan later. And then you'll need to choose a saucepan. Those come out of the saucepan cupboard underneath the sink. The small one is going to be too small. I'm just going to use the biggest one, so we don't need to worry about there being enough space. Okay, so choose the pan with the coloured number on that matches with your kitchen. And I'm just going to put that onto the hob. I don't need it yet. Next then I'm going to chop all of my vegetables. I'm going to do the pepper, the mushrooms. It says to bring a tomato, but I've just got a few small cherry tomatoes, and also the onion. So I'm going to start off with the mushrooms, and I'll place them back on the tray afterwards. Now, because we are going to eat the skin, I'm going to give them a wash. So just take them over to the sink, run them under the water. These are chestnut mushrooms. But if you want to use the small button mushrooms, you can use more than 3. And if you've got any of the large flat mushrooms, just 1 or 2 of those would be fine. I tend to keep the stalks on, but cut the very tip off. Just the tip, because it tends to dry out a little bit. So just turn each of the mushrooms on their sides and then remove the tips there. And then I tend to, using like a claw grip, keeping your fingers behind the knife, go down to the board. I'm going to switch over to a bridge hold, do the last bit, to chop the mushroom into slices. Then you can tell it's a mushroom. If you chop them in some sort of strange ways, then sometimes the pieces turn up a little bit small and you can't really tell what it is. So the 2 types of cut that we use, the technique, we either make a bridge with our spare hand and the knife goes under the bridge, or we make a claw and the knife goes in front of the fingers. The fingers are flat so we don't cut the tips off of them. So I'm making a claw and I'm just moving my fingers back as I move along the mushroom with a bridge for the last cut. Okay. Again. Last one. So to make space on the board, I'm going to put those back on the tray. Next I'm going to do the pepper, and once again we're going to use the skin. I'm not peeling it, so I need to give it a rinse just under the cold tap there. And it says to use half a red pepper, but my pepper's not particularly big, so I am going to chop all of it. The more vegetables that go in, the better really, the more nutrients you're going to get in there. Now I used a knife for the first bit of chopping, which was quite small and it had a smooth edge on the one side. We've also got small knives which have got a serrated edge, so it looks like it's got teeth along it. Those ones are quite good for cutting something with a really shiny skin like a tomato. Now because this is a bit big for my smaller knives, I'm going to use one of the larger knives, being careful when I'm moving around the room with it to always be holding it down to the side of me. So if I fall or trip, the knife's only ever going to go down towards the floor. So using my knife, I'm going to keep my fingers behind her and I'm going to cut the top off the pepper. Now, so that I don't waste all of the flesh around the top, I'm going to put the flat side down and then I'm going to chop around that stem. Okay, that bit will go in the waste. And then chopping these bits up into small cubes. Now I'm going to go down and just release the pith that's attached there to the side of the pepper, put my fingers in and just pull that out. So we're removing the seeds and the pith and just popping those to the side as well. We don't want those bits in. You can give it a tap. Okay, and those are all out. Next, I'm going to cut that pepper in half so I can then lay it flat on the board and then cut along so that I'm cutting my pepper into strips. And the same again with this side. Okay, remember, if you're using a larger pepper, it does say in the ingredients to just use half, but mine's quite small, so I'm going to use a whole one. Then just taking a few pieces at a time, turn them on their sides. Okay, you might like to do less than this at any one time. Keeping your fingers behind the knife and chopping them into little bite-sized dice pieces. Okay, popping that onto the tray. Freeing up your board for the next ingredient. Okay, next one that I'm going to chop is my tomato, or in this case, a few small tomatoes. Again, I'm going to rinse them off. Shake, bring them back to the board, and then decide which knife you want to use. I find that these ones slip over the skin a little bit, but actually, as long as you're sawing through it, it's okay. But that's where these serrated knives become quite good with something a bit more slippery like this. So because I'm using small tomatoes, I'm going to start off by cutting them in half, and then cut each half in half again using a bridge hold. So I just cut them into little quarters. If you're using a whole tomato, you're not going to be able to do it like that. You're going to need to cut your tomato into slices. Right, so we've got a nice fine dice there. Imagine this was your tomato. If you were going to cut it finely this way, you would just chop it into slices this way and then put the flat pieces of tomato on the board and then dice it up in the same way as we did with the peppers. Right, so again, clearing your board, ready for your onion. This onion is probably about the same size as a tennis ball. You don't want one any bigger than this. If you have got a bigger onion than this, you probably won't want to use all of it. But this is the way round that it would grow in the ground. This is where all the roots come out on. I've just pulled them off and put them on the corner, so you've got little like hairs that grow at the bottom. That's the roots of the onion. So it will grow this way in the ground. And then this is trimmed down. You've usually got a longer piece that comes out of the soil. And we're going to cut the top of the onion off. Okay, so fingers behind the knife. The roots are still on. You've cut the top off. Okay, make sure you do the correct end. Place the flat side down on the board, make a bridge, and then cut through the middle of the root. So you've got half the root on one side, half the root on the other. Then you can go in and remove the skin. Now sometimes you only need to remove one layer of skin. On this onion, I'm going to have to remove a second layer. And occasionally you might remove a second layer and see that you've still got skin on your third layer. If that's the case, then you remove a third layer. Okay, as you can see, I've removed all of the brown, dry skin off of there. And I'll do the same with the other one. Do both layers at the same time. And I'm going to work with one half at a time. So placing one piece of onion down on the board, we're going to take the knife and we're aiming to cut basically down the lines that you can see are naturally occurring on the onion, but we're aiming to leave the root on. So we're going to start each cut a centimetre or so away from the root, because the root's going to keep the onion together. Now you can either put it on its end like this and chop around, or you'll probably find it easier to place it down on the work surface and do it. So holding it with the bridge so that you're holding the pieces of onion together, because they will want to flatten out. Just hold it together, tip of the knife goes in, and then just bring it down so it doesn't slip off of the slippery skin on the outside. Okay? A professional chef would then cut in towards their fingers to cut this side bit, but I wouldn't encourage you to do that because it's not a very safe way of chopping. But basically we want to try and cut that edge piece. Then using your hands to hold it all together, because if you look, if I press it down, it's all going to fall apart. The root is what's keeping it all together. If I chop the root off, I'd have sliced onion, but I want it diced. So I'm going to hold it together and then I'm going to chop down towards the board. Being really careful to keep moving my fingers back after each cut. And when I get too close to my fingers, I can stop it on its flat side, and then I can chop into it this way. Just go around it. Okay. Like this. Let's just pop that to the back of the board, and I'll show you again with the second half. So you can either have it up on its ends and cut around like this. That's quite useful for the first couple of cuts on each side. Put it flat on the board, tip in of the knife down, slicing it, but being really careful to make sure that we're leaving the root on, so we're only starting our cuts here. Okay, that would be a sliced onion, but we want it diced, so we're going to hold it all together nice and tight, and then cut through it the other way to dice it. When you get close to your fingers, turn it down to the board. Dice up those bits. So we want to make sure we've got no skin, no roots, just onion on the board. That's the last ingredient that I need to chop. Okay. So next, I'm going to go over to my frying pan, my saucepan, sorry, and I'm going to decide which ring I'm going to use. There are 2 large rings and 2 small rings. A small ring is perfectly adequate for this. Even the lowest heat on the larger ring can be a little bit too much for what we're doing. So I'm going to choose one of the smaller rings. So I'm going to use the front right. I'm going to make sure that it's turned on at the wall. So this is a gas hob. Then I'm going to press the little button in the middle of the display to stop that flashing because it's been turned on for the first time. And then find which dial is front right, which is this one in this occasion. So I push it in, turn it round, and the gas will light. Now, because I've got a small ring, a medium to high heat is going to be about right. So this large picture of a flame means that it's the highest. The small one is the lowest, and anything in between, okay? I'll just show you what it looks like on the electric. So if you're using an electric hob, again, you're going to switch it on at the wall, find the red switch, press the button in the middle of the display, and then decide which ring you're going to use. In this case, it would be front left for a small ring. I've got front left and rear left, which are the small ones, and front right and rear right, which are the large ones. In fact, this rear left is unusual because you can have it as a small ring or a large ring, depending on which way you turn the dial on the display here. So if I'm going to use the front left, find the front left, and I've got numbers that go from 1 being the lowest heat, right the way round to 6 being the highest. And we'd want to choose something around a 4 to start off with on the electric. And when you turn the electric hob on, the heat isn't instant like it would be with the gas. It's going to take a few moments, a couple of minutes probably, to get up to heat, whereas the gas is very instant. Okay, so let's go back over to the gas hob. So I'm going to relight my gas hob. I'm going to put it on about 2/3 of its full heat, and I'm going to measure 1 tablespoon of oil into the pan. Now we have tablespoons in the drawers, okay, which look like this, which you can use, and we also have sets of measuring spoons which are more accurate, and we can find the 1 tablespoon. Those are kept in the drawer just on the end of this unit here. And I'm going to measure in 1 tablespoon of oil. This happens to just be a vegetable oil, but you could use olive oil. You wouldn't want a sesame oil or anything quite as strong as that, but olive oil or vegetable or sunflower oil is fine. Make sure you've got your wooden spoon out of the drawer. That's ready to start stirring when you go in with your first ingredient. There's a little notch which goes on the side of your saucepan where you can store your spoon when you're not using it. So I've just given it about 30 seconds to warm up, and then I'm going to put my onion into the pan. I can tell my pan's hot because it's sizzling, so I'm going to turn it down as soon as I'm free with my hands. Drop it down a bit and give it a stir. Now if I'm going to cook it on a heat quite that hot all the way through, I might end up burning it. I probably should have put it in about 10 seconds quicker than I did. So, I'm keeping an eye on my onions to make sure that they don't go black, to make sure that they don't stick to the pan. Still quite noisy, so I'm going to just drop it down in heat a little bit more. I just want to soften them. As they soften, they're going to caramelise, they're going to go a little tiny bit golden brown, and they'll turn quite sweet. Okay, I'm starting to lose some of that noise now, so I'm a bit happier with the temperature. Okay. So the oil is in there just to lubricate the pan so that the onion doesn't stick to the pan, and we can use that along with controlling our temperature to make sure that we're not sticking and burning our onion onto the pan. If I'm going to leave the pan at any point, I'm going to make sure that the handle is turned to the side and not out the front to be knocked off by somebody walking past. That hand to hold it, the other hand to stir it, or you can have it the other way around if that's easier for you. Okay. Now, whilst that continues softening, I'm just going to weigh out my rice. The type of rice that it says to use is just a cheap long grain rice. I brought some basmati rice in just for you to have a look at the difference. You can see that the basmati rice is a little bit thinner and a little bit pointier than the long grain. It doesn't quite work as well. Sometimes it goes a little bit mushy. So just an ordinary long grain rice. It's not a quick cook one. If you do bring a quick cook one, make sure your child knows that it's quick cook because the cooking time will be much less. So I've put my small bowl on the scales. I'm going to press the on-off 0 button. And make sure that it is set to 0 grams with a bowl on it before I start. Then carefully weigh in 150 grams. Okay. Plus or minus a couple of grams is absolutely fine. You don't want it to be 200 grams rather than 150, but that's 152. So plus or minus 2 is absolutely fine. And I'm going to go back to my pan now, which I switched off because I wasn't keeping an eye on it. And I can see that my onions are just starting to brown off a little bit. I don't really want these black bits, but these little golden brown bits are okay. So I'll let that have another couple of moments while I do my kettle. So in each of the kitchens there's a kettle. Just empty the contents of it out because you don't know how long it's been there, and refill your kettle from the cold tap. I don't need it to be full because it's only me. When you're cooking, there'll be 4 of you, so fill it up to the maximum line on the kettle and then turn it on. Okay? That's in preparation to make our stock. So that's when you're going to need to use your measuring jug. Before you put anything in it, just have a good look and see if you can find out where you need to fill it to. The amount of water that we're going to be using is 550 millilitres. So find where it says millilitres, that's 1,000 millilitres or 1 litre. There's the 500 mark, there's the 600 mark. I know I need to fill it to halfway between those two. So your stock cube is going to go in this jug. You can use a vegetable OXO cube, which is quite crumbly, and you can crumble it in with your fingers. Or these ones tend to be a little bit softer, more like a paste. They don't really crumble very well, but they do dissolve in the water. Or you can use a stock pot, which is more of a jelly. Okay, I'm going to use a stock pot. Peel the lid off, pop it into the jug. Waste goes in the bin. Okay, so now my onion's softened, and I can see it's starting to get a little bit of colour to it. So now I'm going to add my chopped peppers. I've used red pepper. If you want to use orange or yellow, you can, or even green. I tend to find the red ones are the sweetest, so they're usually the most popular. And then just give it a stir. I've got my heat on the lowest temperature, and that's perfectly adequate. I'm just going to stir those around and start browning them off. They're just starting to soften them, really. All right, 2 minutes. Now let me show you how to use the timer on the oven. If I want to cook this for 2 minutes, what I can do is I press the button on the middle of the dial in, press up until I get to 2, and that will beep once it gets to the 2-minute mark. So whilst that's cooking, I'm going to give it the occasional stir, but I'm going to make my stock. So I'm going to bring the kettle over to my jug, and I'm not going to fill it up like this, because if I'm holding it in the air, the jug might be leaning towards me or leaning away, and it might not be accurate. So I'm actually going to bring myself down to the same level as the jug and carefully pour the water in until it gets halfway between the 500 and the 600 mark. 550. Okay, and then pop it back for the next person. And I'm going to take a spoon and give my stock, so this is the stock, you've got your stock cube or your stock pot, or you might have a teaspoon of stock powder, and we're aiming to just dissolve that into the boiling water. So give it a stir until you haven't got any lumps left. That's going to add some moisture to soak up into the dry rice as we start to cook it. What we're going to do when this beeper goes off next is to measure in our curry powder and also put in our peas. The amount of curry powder that we're going to use is, it says 1 10 millilitre spoon. Well, this is a tablespoon, so this is 15 millilitres. And the teaspoons, well, they're 5 millilitres. So we can either do 2 teaspoons or 2/3 of a tablespoon. I'm going to use, for accuracy, my measuring spoons. And I'm going to find the teaspoon and I'm going to use 2 of them. Now, a correct measurement for a teaspoon is not that. That is a heaped spoon. The correct measurement will be levelled to the top of the spoon. So I'm going to be using 2 of those. Okay, that was good timing. So my beeper started to go off. I'm going to press the button on the front of the display to cancel it. And I'm going to go 1, 2 with my curry powder. This is a mild curry powder. It's just going to add some flavour. If you're not keen on it, you could just put 1 teaspoon in, and then in with my peas. These were frozen peas. They're usually a little bit greener and a little bit nicer than the tinned peas that you can buy. But you could use fresh and pod them yourself at home if you want to. So I've just given that a stir through, and I'm going to be adding my rice and my stock. Now this is the correct amount of water, the amount of rice that we use. If we don't measure our water and our rice correctly, our mixture is either going to be too dry or too wet at the end. This is correct, so make sure that you're measuring the rice and the stock absolutely accurately. So I'm going to just turn my heat up because I want to bring this up to the boil. And then I'm going to go to the saucepan cupboard and I'm going to find a lid which fits my saucepan. The reason I'm going to use a lid is because it stops us losing a lot of the water through evaporation. So I'm going to put the lid on, I'm going to rest my spoon in the edge of the saucepan handle, and once this is up to the boil, which it isn't yet, but when it is, I'm going to drop it down onto its lowest heat just to simmer it. And then I'm going to set the timer. So a reminder how to set the timer. You press the button in the middle and then you go up. Now this time I'm going to cook it for 15 minutes. Okay, and that needs to be the time from boiling. It's pretty much up to boiling now. So let's reduce to a simmer, 15 minutes. A couple of times during the simmering time, if you can just remove the lid and give the savoury rice a little bit of a stir, that should just stop the rice from sticking to the bottom of the pan, and then pop the lid back on to keep the heat in. What you're looking for with a simmer is just a gentle bubble rising up through the water. It shouldn't be boiling rapidly. That's going to make all the ingredients stick to the pan. Just a gentle simmer like this. Meanwhile, whilst that's cooking, I can see I've got 12 minutes left on there. I'm going to put my vegetable peelings into the bin, and I'm going to bring all of my dirty items over to the sink, which I've filled with hot water and a small squirt of the washing up liquid. And then using either a dishcloth or a washing up brush, I'm going to wash all of my dirty items and put them to drain on the draining board here. Another couple of minutes has passed, so we're going to have another look and give the mixture another stir. You can see there's still quite a lot of liquid in there, but we do have 9 minutes of cooking time left. Again, we can see that we've still got that gentle simmer in there. Meanwhile, I've also washed up all of the items that I used and popped them onto a clean draining board to dry off. Next, I'm going to collect a tea towel and give them a dry. Another 3 minutes have passed, so it's time to give the rice another stir. And then pop the lid back on again. And now I've also dried up all of my items and I'm ready to put those away in the cupboards. Just to give you an idea what the correct equipment is that you should find in one of the drawers, you would have a palette knife on the left, followed by a wooden spoon, a tablespoon, plastic spatula, table knife, fork, pastry brush and teaspoon. I've got my wooden spoon that I'm still using, but my tablespoon can go back in there. And in the cupboard underneath, on the top shelf, we would have a chopping board, a cooling rack and a tray, which is what our equipment goes on. Our food goes on, and a rolling pin. And then down the bottom, we'd have a stack with a plate, a large bowl, a small bowl and a sieve. And then to the side, we would have a grater and a jug. So when I come round and check your cupboards, that's what I'm going to be looking for. Right, so we're down to the last 2 minutes of cooking time. Let's have a look and see how it looks now. Right, so we can see that most of the liquid has been soaked up by the dry rice. We'll give it a stir to make sure that it's not sticking to the bottom of the pan. It's not, it's okay. Now the eagle-eyes amongst you would have noticed that I haven't added my tomato. The idea of the tomato is that when you put it into your container, the tomato sprinkles over the top as a bit of a garnish. Now personally I don't like raw tomato like that, so in the last couple of minutes of the cooking time I am actually going to put my tomato into the rice, but you can decide whether you would prefer to cook it in with the rice or whether you would prefer to use it as a garnish. Now you could use one large container. I've used 2. If you've got a lesson in the morning, you could put half of your mixture into a small container and then have it for your lunch and take the other half home. I would recommend eating it within a couple or 3 days and keeping it in the fridge. Rice is quite a high risk ingredient, so we need to make sure that we keep it under refrigeration and cool it down quite quickly from its cooking temperature down to fridge temperature. Okay, so we're at full time. The beeper's going off and it says it's 0. So I'm going to turn the heat off now and remove the lid. Just to cancel out the noise of that, if you just press the button in the middle again. And we should be in a position where we've got most of the liquid which has been absorbed by the rice. Give it a stir, and we can see that that's cooked. We want the grains of rice to be al dente, which means there's a slight bite to it. Once we finish using the oven, make sure we turn the dial off on the display and also turn it off at the wall for safety. And now we're ready to transfer it into our containers and cool it down. You can see how much the mixture turns out to. This is 2 small containers full. And one thing that I should note is that those people that have used red onion in the past, it does tend to give the dish a little bit of a strange colour, so I would stick with a white onion. And if you're using your tomato as a garnish, it would sprinkle over the rice at this point. That's how you make savoury rice.